Donald Trump didn't just appoint Supreme Court justices. He turned the whole process into a game show. And today we're going back to law school. We're going to talk about the basics of where Supreme Court justices come from, the process by which they're appointed, the rules that govern, and what rules don't exist when it comes to the conduct of Supreme Court justices, and how it's been sort of gamified and taken advantage of, especially lately. I'm Shant Karnikian. That's Brian Kabateck. This is Civil Action on the Legal AF Network. Before we go on, remember to hit that subscribe button, hit that like button if you like this content, if you like this whole network. Brian, where do we start with? What do we start with today on this issue of the Supreme Court?
Like you said, let's take a little trip like we're in law school for a minute and explain
Yeah.
the United States Supreme Court. Because one of the folks that watched this asked us to give a little bit more information about the United States Supreme Court. So the United States Supreme Court, interestingly, there's a number of interesting facts. First of all, it's Article 3 of the United States Constitution. And it says that there can be judges that are appointed for life and justices of the Supreme Court. That's what it effectively says. And they're appointed for life. They're all confirmed by the Senate, not Congress, just the Senate. The 100 senators have to confirm them on a simple majority. And they're
And
appointed
just
by
to
the
be
president.
clear, I think a point of clarification, or some people might know this, but they're not just unilaterally appointed by the president, even though that's what it seems like. Article 2 of the Constitution gives the president the power to nominate Supreme Court justices with the advice and consent of the Senate. So as Brian said, you need the Senate to confirm them. And the idea behind this, the founders, I think what they had in mind was a check and balance system where the president represents the people's electoral choice. He was elected by the people. And then the Senate determines the individual states and the public and their own specific constituents' interests. So you have that process of having people
Yeah, I
be
find that to be
vetted.
a super important point you're making, Sean, is that if you understand the Constitution of the United States, you understand that it is full of checks and balances. That,
Yeah,
as you just said, the president can nominate, but the Supreme Court is only approved, and all the judges are only approved by the Senate. One of the things that Donald Trump has driven a truck through in the last 9 or 10 months is the ability of Congress to have any kind of check or balance over his authority.
yeah.
So what's happened here is these judges are appointed and they're appointed for life. I mean, literally, there are famous stories of Supreme Court justices well into their old age and dementia and poor health refusing to step down, and there's nothing they can do about it. There has never been a
Right.
Supreme Court justice in the history of the United States who has ever been impeached or removed by Congress, which is a method, which is a mechanism. And I think that's extremely important that we hover on that for just a second.
Right.
Is that and I'm going to circle back to it in the end here, talking about two of the justices on the Supreme Court that I think have serious ethical issues and why we can't remove them right now. But you could remove theoretically a judge or justice who's appointed for life by impeachment process through Congress. And judges, not justices of the Supreme Court, but lower court judges, a few times over the history of the United States have been removed by impeachment. Only a
Yeah.
few times.
Yeah. And look, I want to touch on another thing that sort of was asked by the question to us that prompted us to ponder this issue. But the reason why it's a lifetime appointment is because you want to be able to insulate these ultimate decision makers from politics. And now we're starting to see the downside of it being a politicized process because they're supposed to be insulated from politics, but now you have politics that shape the total trajectory of the Supreme Court, which is a problem, I think.
Right, right. Let's
Um,
let's and let's spend just 1 minute on that issue, which is if these judges had to be renominated every decade or every 5 years, whatever, pick your 12 years, whatever the process would be, then they theoretically they would become very political because they'd be bending to the whim of the time because they know that the president, incoming president, would have to appoint them and approve them. The Senate would have to approve. So, the idea has been they're independent. Their decisions have no place in public opinion. They do what they do because it's the right thing to do. It follows the law. It follows the Constitution of the United States. It follows and enforces the laws. And again, checks and balances. It's an important check
yeah,
on the power of the president, and Congress is the Senate, right?
yeah,
So, I mean, we could, spend an hour talking about that alone. But so in theory, it's been great. And it
Yeah.
has been very effective over time. I mean, you can look back at Brown versus the Board of Education, which is the desegregation case, the case that, there used to be a law in the United States, separate but equal. And the Supreme Court in the 1950s, Thurgood Marshall was the lawyer that argued the case, later became the first Black member of the United States Supreme Court. And at the time, there was a lot of sentiment that separate but equal was the law and it should remain the law, and that Black children shouldn't go to school with white children, particularly in the South. Well, the Supreme Court comes along and says, no, that's unconstitutional.
Yeah.
And the problem is, Sean, is let's stop at 1987 and talk about what happened and why everything has changed since 1987.
Yeah. So the Supreme Court nomination process, or the hearing process, where in the Senate they hold hearings, that became publicized, right? You were able to televise it. And all of a sudden it became sort of, not to over exaggerate, but kind of like almost like a game show. It sort of became it became an opportunity for senators to engage in some degree of theater over the questions they ask. And the process slowly, and that's exactly what I was going to say, over the last 30, 40, 50 years, the process has become more and more ideological. So it's really become a purely almost political process cloaked in, you know, the cloaked in meritocracy, but it's not until then. So you have this whole thing being publicized, and then you have the confirmation of folks, starting with, I don't know, Thomas and who else, Brian, but it being political
Well,
theater.
actually, before Thomas, there was Robert Borg, and he was a Bork, B-O-R-K. He was a appointed. He was not confirmed. It was televised. He wasn't confirmed. And now what's happened is it's become political theater.
Yeah.
So it's and you get groups out there, both on the left and on the right, who are doing everything they can to try to become part of this process, to point out something, point out tiny flaws, something somebody did in college, whether you agree or disagree with it, whether it was a good idea or a bad idea. They're out there trying to make this a show, and at the same time, justices have started to become kind of mini celebrities. Look at Ruth Bader Ginsburg, and I want to just for 1 second talk about somebody who a lot of people, on the left really love, Ruth Bader Ginsburg. Well, this is somebody who should have stepped down earlier and
Yeah.
allowed Obama to appoint someone. Instead, it allowed Trump to appoint Gorsuch, who then
Yeah.
became one of his three appointments to the United States Supreme Court. So, you've got this whole issue with it becoming theater, it becoming politicized. Look, we've had bad courts in the past. There's no question about that. We've had courts that are, all white men making pro-business decisions. There's a famous case called Carolina Products that we all learn about in law school, and economic due process being, and I'm getting way in the weeds here, Sean, so pull me out, man. But all these rules that used to exist in the courts shift back and forth, but it has just never been this politicized, this
This
much
partisan,
theater.
yeah, yeah. I mean, it hasn't. I mean, I think I was going to say like growing up, but in law school, kind of growing up as a lawyer, what you learned were that Supreme Court justices were scholars. They were legal scholars. They were sought and nominated and confirmed because of their fluency in the law, because of their legal scholarship, how deeply they've analyzed something, not necessarily because of political loyalties. And that's kind of all gone away. It's all turned into
Right.
political gamesmanship. And
And
yeah, go ahead.
sorry, I just because you mentioned the word legal scholars, I just wanted to focus on the one Supreme Court that I think everyone can agree, even the Republicans can agree candidly, is not a legal scholar, and that's Clarence Thomas. Now, without going into Clarence Thomas's background, that's a whole story about potential sexual harassment. Anita Hill. I've spoken personally once in my life to Anita Hill. He as a justice barely spoke for like a decade. I mean, he didn't even ask questions.
Right.
And it used to be that there was a Supreme Court justice who's since passed away, and anything that justice would do, he'd follow. Now he's following another justice named Sam Alito, and anything Alito does, and these guys are the far right conservatives. So here's the problem with the Supreme Court, shot, and let's talk about this for just a minute here.
Yeah.
There's no way to remove somebody who has ethical concerns because the ethics rules don't apply to Supreme Court justices. right?
Yeah, hasn't he come out and hasn't Thomas said it? I forget who it was, but hasn't Thomas specifically said that there's no ethical rules?
Alito did, and both of them
Alito said
have
it, yeah.
similar problems. The problem that Thomas has is he's accepted over $4 million in undisclosed trips from a wealthy person named Harlan Crow. And they've gone, including the fact that also there have been payments to his wife, like $25,000 for consulting. And there's a pattern of non-disclosure. So what he did is he never really disclosed, and there's no way to remove him. I mean, they could file impeachment charges, but since the Republicans control the Senate right now, those wouldn't go anywhere. So that's him. And then Alito, on a much smaller basis, has gotten trips by some guy named Paul Singer, who's had multiple cases before the United States Supreme Court. Also, Alito's had at his home an upside down American flag after January 6th, which was a direct symbol for Stop the Seal. And he then blamed his wife. And then Alito's the one who came out and said that he didn't have to recuse himself, which is also, I know we're really talking a lot here, but you could recuse yourself. You could be Clarence Thomas and have a case involving Harlan Crow come up in front of you and go, look, he's a friend of mine. I've had
Yeah.
trips with him. I'm recusing myself. I'm not going to vote on this case. You could do that, but they don't do it.
Yeah, because there's nothing requiring them to do it. There's no set of ethical rules that they need to follow. Yes, there's the threat of impeachment, but as you said, that's not going to happen with a Republican controlled Congress. And there's no other rules. There's nothing else. There's no other check on them. So yeah, it is this idea of having a politically independent judiciary at the very top. Comes with a cost, and the cost is no ability to keep them in check once they're appointed. That's why the confirmation process is so important. That's why I think we've lost sight of with the advice and consent of the Senate portion of this. And I think there's no better example than Trump gamifying this, politicizing it, and just turning it into pure political gamesmanship. That's all it is here. So we're like locked in for a generation with this court, and that's
let us
a big
know.
problem.
People listening to this, let us know if you want us to focus on other issues regarding the Supreme Court or explain other
Yeah.
parts about the American judicial system. We're happy to go down that road. I mean, we spent over 10 minutes talking about this. We could spend a lot more. People go to law school and spend years studying this kind of stuff. So it is complex, but the most important thing to remember is that in theory it was a good system, and then it became televised, publicized, and politicized.
Yeah. Last question to you, Brian. Has Trump called you about being on the short list for Supreme Court?
No, but I once did speak on a panel with a Justice Carlos Moreno, who eventually became an ambassador under Obama, and he finished giving a speech. And at the end of his speech, someone asked him, he was on the short list, and the nomination went to Sotomayor and not him. And his last word was, he said, I now know that I'll never be on the Supreme Court. And I was the next speaker, and I stood up and I said, well, Justice Moreno, that's one thing you and I have in common. Neither of us will ever be on the Supreme Court.
That's funny. That's funny. Yeah. I don't know. Maybe I will be on. No, I'm kidding. I probably don't have a good chance of it, but thanks for tuning in anyway. I hope this has been a helpful discussion. If you like this content, remember to hit that subscribe button, hit that like button, share this with whoever you think might find it interesting, and share with us your feedback. I'm Shant Karnikian. That's Brian Kabateck. We're two lawyers based out of Los Angeles, but doing cases all over the country at a firm called Kabateck LLP. If you have any questions, you can reach out directly to us through social media, through the comments, wherever you want. And thanks for tuning in. We'll see you on the next one.
Can't get your fill of Legal AF? Me neither. That's why we formed the Legal AF Substack. Every time we mention something in a hot take, whether it's a court filing or a oral argument, come over to the Substack. You'll find the court filing and the oral argument there, including a daily roundup that I do called, wait for it, Morning AF. What else? All the other contributors from Legal AF are there as well. We got some new reporting. We got interviews. We got ad-free versions of the podcast and hot takes. Where? Legal AF on Substack. Come over now to free subscribe.